What do you think about Lord Hague's proposal?
Well, I think it's pitiful and indeed pitiable to see somebody in whom so many people once invested so many hopes for a revival of conservatism in this country, uh, regurgitating, as so many people do, ignorantly and cliches, the playbook script of the public relations men of the Big Dope campaign. In fact, it's not the first time Mr. Hague has done this. Obviously, it didn't get him enough attention the last time in 2018 when he was writing for the Daily Telegraph. There seems to be a guaranteed slot which he can occupy to propose the legalization or decriminalisation of drugs in major unpopular newspapers. He has nothing new to say. I have to upbraid you for referring to an alleged war on drugs, which is supposedly not. Well, there has been no such thing as a war on drugs. I wrote some years ago to either derision or silence a book called The War We Never Fought, which the title is rather explanatory, on the fact that there has not been any such wars, especially in this country. On the contrary, there has been a long, slow but definite, unofficial, de facto decriminalisation of drugs going back to 1967 as a result of an extremely effective, well-funded, and indeed celebrity-supported lobbying campaign. So we still have, technically, extremely severe laws on our books. You can technically go to prison for 5 years for being in possession of marijuana. But this doesn't happen, and many other aspects of that law are simply unenforced, and they've been unenforced increasingly over what is now half a century, and it's not particularly surprising as a result that the use of drugs in this country has gone up exponentially in that time. The other folly in Lord Hague's pronouncement is the suggestion that drug abuse is some sort of disease that needs treatment. Look, there are a lot of people in this country who are really seriously ill. They have diseases, whether multiple sclerosis or cancers of various kinds. They would love it if they could give up having those diseases and could stop. Well, drug abusers can indeed and often do stop taking drugs, but you can't stop having multiple sclerosis or cancer. You've got it. To compare a voluntary decision of self-harm with a disease which you cannot escape seems to me to be an insult to the genuinely ill, as well as a very, very poor basis for policy. If you want to stop people taking drugs, you don't indulge them. And one of the most ridiculous policies pursued by this government, so ridiculous that even Russell Brand recognizes its absurdity, is the prescribing of methadone, a heroin substitute, to heroin takers. Many of them immediately sell it to buy heroin. There's very little evidence of it having ever been effective. We spend huge numbers of millions of taxpayers' pounds on giving it out. In some parts of the country, at some points, the death rate among people taking methadone has been higher than among those taking heroin itself. It's an absurdity. We persist with it because of this ridiculous ideology in our establishment that drug takers are victims rather than criminals. Whereas you look over to the other side of the world, to two extremely civilized, advanced, law-governed, free countries. I'm not here talking about Singapore or the Philippines or anything like that, or death penalty drugs places. I'm talking about Japan and South Korea, both of which impose and actually do impose quite stiff penalties in law for the possession of drugs. And they have much, much lower incidences of drug abuse. And what they also still have is what we had in the 1960s and for a little time afterwards, a very considerable stigma against taking drugs because culture follows law. If the law deters and punishes, that changes the mood of the country. What we have in this country is an incredibly relaxed view of drugs. People treat marijuana, which can destroy people's minds as far as I can see, or the correlation between the use of marijuana and mental illness is now so strong it's almost impossible to ignore. People treat it as a joke. Well, it's certainly not a joke for the family members of persons who become permanently mentally ill as a result, nor is it a joke for the people who suffer the violent crimes which are committed by so many marijuana users. This myth that it's a peaceful drug simply isn't borne out. Anybody who doubts this, there's an extraordinary website and a book to back it up called Attack or Smoke Cannabis, which gives so many details of cases in which horrible violent crimes are committed by people who are long-term users of this hugely dangerous drug, wrongly described as soft and wrongly treated as a joke by our culture. We could do it differently. But people such as William Hague, who really ought to know better and who's been in positions of responsibility and ought to make a better effort to understand the situation, simply hasn't bothered to get himself properly briefed and churns out this stuff, which gets in popularity among the media classes and among the liberal elite. But it simply is not properly research-based, and it has no foundation in reality. I mean, I just have to say one other thing. Portugal is constantly waved around as kind of drug paradise. So untrue is this that a couple of years ago, the mayor of Porto, Portugal's second biggest city, said that it was time that they started penalizing drug use again. All that the Portuguese did was in fact to stop formally enforcing laws which they'd given up doing anyway. The consequences of this are, to put it mildly, mixed, and lifetime use of several drugs has gone up. It simply isn't. It doesn't. I've written a long blog posting about the Portuguese drug paradise and the myth of it. It simply doesn't actually add up. But it's constantly touted again by people who haven't bothered to look, who long to have an excuse to relax drug taking for reasons which you'll have to ask them. But my personal conviction is that my generation, the 60s generation, now very much in power and in influence everywhere, were by and large given over to drug abuse in the 1960s and 1970s. They let their children do it now. They're not prepared to go back on it or admit that they made a terrible mistake. So we have to live with that.
So is your solution then, I mean, by the way, drug use in this country rose alarmingly during the lockdown, particularly cocaine, which seems to be a massively increasing problem, but drug use generally has gone up. In Scotland, it's becoming a serious problem again.
It always has been.
Well, more serious than it even was. Is your solution then, Peter, far from abandoning the alleged war on drugs? Is it to get tougher, to have tough sentences, even for, say, possession of cannabis?
Well, it's not a matter of tough, actually. It's a matter of doing what the law says we should do. And the maximum sentence, they say, for the possession of marijuana now is 5 years. Well, I'm not in favor of maximum sentences under most circumstances, and I'm certainly not in favor of sending first offenders to prison. But all you need to do if you want a law obeyed is to have it visibly enforced. And that means, say, if someone were to be arrested for possession of cannabis, now nothing would happen to them at all, the chances are, if the police could even be bothered to arrest them. If instead they were given, on a first offence, a genuine caution, that is to say, something which was recorded but didn't form a criminal record, but was definitely kept on file, didn't hamper them in their career or anything, but they were told, look, this is your first time, we're giving you a free pass on the first time, do it again and there'll be serious trouble. And if on a second offence, they got 3 months in prison. And if this happened enough times, I absolutely promise you people would change their habits. The idea that if you enforce the law properly, you'd fill the prisons up. Who's going to give up all the future possibility of a career, all the future possibility of traveling freely abroad for the sake of a spliff? No one is. And there's a very good example of this to me, the not too distant past. 1967, introduction of the breathalyzer. Enforced. And as a result, within the course of about 3 or 4 months, hundreds of thousands of people who previously thought it was absolutely harmless and quite permissible to drive a car while drunk stopped doing it, because suddenly the law was being enforced, and they might see in their own area 5 or 6 people in court for it and getting seriously punished and losing their licenses. Enforcement of laws changes behavior and deters people. And it could be, as I say, it's not a solution. There is no solution to the fact that some people are idiots. You can't pass a law against people being idiots. What you can do is reduce the number of people who are prepared to put that idiocy into practice. And that's basically what law is about. And as I say, Japan and South Korea, which do not hang people for drug offenses, nor are they dictatorships, they managed to do this very much as we did before about 1967 in this country. It's perfectly possible to do. And if people like William Hague would only learn something about the subject and stop talking about decriminalisation, then we might get there. But the trouble is that the establishment, right up to, say, former leaders of the Conservative Party, has been entirely captured by this immensely slick and well-funded lobby.
Yeah, it's strange that it's a top Tory, as they say in the press, spouting this. Peter, I could talk to you about this many hours longer, but I'm afraid time's out. But thank you so much for your time. A pleasure to talk to you again. Peter Hitchens there, Mail on Sunday columnist. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk Radio.